Okay, thank you very much for joining the Trusted Sec webinar on Office 365 security. What you didn't know, you didn't know. I'm pretty excited for this one. My name is Stephen Marshowitz, Director of Program Management. Because last year, we really got a lot of questions and people asking, well, can't I just do this myself? Or yeah, I think we've pretty much got it down. To this year, it's, hey, we really need some help with this. The shift happened when people started really digging into it. And so again, why we titled it, What You Didn't Know, because there is so much to this. A little bit about Trusted Sec. Trusted Sec, we've continued to really expand our services, and this is a perfect example. One interesting note also is that a lot of services are crossing boundaries between practices and even within practices. For example, organizations are adding blue teams to their pen tests. We're having more program assessments with incident response, technical assessments. Those are becoming more popular. And even this crosses from compliance to technical assessments to remediation. So a lot going on there. Our goal is really to be there for you for the full life cycle of a security program, from building it, testing it, fixing your program, and responding when an incident happens or something goes off track. With that, I'll turn it over to Andrea and Paul. Paul, ready to get started?
Absolutely. Thanks, Stephen, for that. Hi, I'm Paul Sems. I'm the practice lead for our remediation services. Just to give you a quick background on me, prior to joining Trusted Sec, I held the role of a CIO, a CTO, and a general manager. I've worked there for over 10 years in large manufacturing organizations in those executive roles. For 5 years of my career, I managed a regional MSP. During a lot of that time, we implemented Office 365 quite a bit. So we have a lot of real world practical experience, along with balancing that with the business needs that we come together. So we're combining those two things together. Excited to be here today and excited to talk to you about Office 365 and how you can lock down Office 365. Andrew.
Hello, I'm Andrew Schwartz. Thank you very much for joining. I'm a senior security consultant with Trusted Sec. I dabble in penetration testing, purple teaming, blue teaming, auditing and reviewing a variety of different programs across the board. And that is me. Paul?
Excellent. Andrew's been very instrumental in helping us get this information together. So thanks for joining us. He'll be helping us out with quite a few things during this conversation. So let's talk a little bit about the lure of Office 365. So what we're seeing out there is there's this promise that Office 365 is going to do all sorts of things for you, right? It's like this amazing solution that's going to allow us to no longer worry about buying computers or storage. We don't have to buy racks and racks of servers anymore to store all this SharePoint data and all of this email data that's always exploding. We're going to be able to hand that over to Microsoft. There's also this expectation that it's automatically going to give us more reliable services, so that let Microsoft handle all of those issues related to, clustering and keeping things running. There's a strong expectation that you will not have to worry about server updates and patches. These things will just happen. So from the enterprises looking at this and saying, and you're looking at this and saying, wow, this is amazing. This is exactly what I want. I want to be able to have a secure service that has, virtually unlimited storage. If I need more storage, I just pay a little bit more for it. It's going to give me all of these great services. I'm going to be able to use SharePoint Online. I don't have to worry about getting certificates for that anymore. I'm going to be able to use Exchange Online with all the latest updates. I don't have to, ruin my weekend to do an upgrade and do it in test and then move it over to the QA team and then move it into production. All of that gets eliminated. There's this promise that it's going to be a super secure environment. Of course it's going to be secure, right? They include Microsoft multi-factor authentications available out of the box, right? And we have the ability, we don't have to buy SSL certificates and figure out when they expire. And of course, Microsoft has tens of thousands of IT security staff looking at this environment. And so that's super attractive to people. I know as a CIO and in that role, that was one of the things that drew me to it. It's like, wow, I can have this next level platform without the massive capital investment that I would normally have. So, and enterprises are buying that. I mean, if we take a look at some of these statistics here, and a lot of this comes from McAfee, they wrote a great guide called The Definitive Guide to Office 365 Security, and they also did Office 365 Adoptions and Risk. Now, this is from 2018, but look at that, 87.3% of enterprises are using Office 365. That's amazing. And that number, the latest stats, and I've yet to get, the data correlated, is up into the upper 90s. So the mid to upper 90s I've seen for 2019 of enterprises and businesses are using some form of Office 365. That's quite a huge amount of market penetration, which also we'll talk about on the reality side of things, makes it quite challenging for us to defend against threat actors. The average organization, this also came from McAfee, uploads 1.37 terabytes of data into Office 365 each month. That's a massive amount for every single organization moving data to the into the cloud. Finally, they found that during their analysis, 17.4% of the documents that were uploaded contain sensitive data. So people are using it, and with the 17.4%, that indicates people have a lot of trust in it. They're willing to put some of their sensitive data into the cloud. But with all of that, just like life, some of the expectations do not quite meet reality. And that's what we're going to talk about today. This disconnect that exists between what we just talked about, all of those expectations, and what Office 365 comes to in reality. Now, it can be that goal. You can get to that expectation. You can get to that utopia of having all of those things we talked about, but it doesn't come by just turning the system on. And we're going to talk about this gap that exists, the reality that we've seen in our experience. Where there is a gap. There's a gap between what the expectation is and reality. So we're going to go into one of the areas here. In 2019, between May 18, 2019 and July, the FBI reported that there's been a 100% increase in business email compromise. Now, business email compromise is when threat actors attack an organization and they pretty much play a magic trick on the individuals. They fool the CFO, they fool the controller, and they get them to release money through wire transfers or other means, or even individuals to transfer money to threat actors. And so we've seen a massive increase in that just between May and July of 19. But here at Trusted Sec in 2019, we have covered over 20 business email cases just in 19. And the crazy thing is almost all of them were on Office 365. So we see a lot of those deployments, and we would expect that with over now 90% of organizations using Office 365, that we would see this increase. But there's something else going on here. And what we're seeing is, and we're going to be talking about that, is a lot of the default configuration settings are just not set up correctly. A typical attack that we see where the account has been compromised, the person is attacked either through brute force or through a leaked credentials. So for example, someone buys a list of all these users' email addresses, and they say, hey, wow, there's 100 of these at XYZ Corporation. Let's go ahead and see if we have email addresses for those email addresses. We find those emails and we find their passwords. Let's go ahead and try those. We could do with the same password, and maybe we know that the company's name is Contoso, so we're going to spray their Office 365 environment with Contoso 1 and Contoso 123. So all of that's usually how those attacks happen. Once they get in, the threat actors go ahead and they log in, they research. We've seen cases where individuals, these threat actors, have been in the organization for months, if not longer than that, researching that organization, understanding the players, understanding how email is sent. So we've seen some where the threat actor actually looks at how the CEO talks to the CFO. And when they actually pull off these attacks, they simulate those emails using the same harsh language or the same ways of speaking through email. and they get the wire transferred information is compromised, and they go ahead and they say, hey, send the money, that $250,000 or that $3 million transaction that we were talking about, go ahead and send them. And by the way, please use this account. And so we've seen that happen over and over. And so a lot of that takes place because a lot of these settings are not set up right. So let's jump into some of these. We're going to be exploring a few areas here, quite a few areas actually, where the out-of-box default configuration is not set up to protect you. We have to remember that with Office 365, it's relatively, it's actually designed out of the box to facilitate collaboration. It talks about being a collaboration tool. So what's happening there is that it's designed so that you can turn it on and start collaborating. And that's actually one of the reasons that I believe is one of the reasons for the mass adoption, because it does start working and you can start collaborating. In the past, I've implemented SharePoint, for example. And with SharePoint, if you implement it internally, you seem to struggle to get it adopted. But SharePoint Online has exploded. And the reason is because people have connectivity. They can connect from their phone. They can connect while they're traveling. They can sync documents. All of that expectation is now available to people, where if you had a SharePoint install that staggered or didn't work in your internal environment, that was probably because it didn't have that connectivity. So we're trying to get this balancing act where we have this use cases where we need to have synchronization throughout the world, but at the same time, we want to have it secure. So we're going to talk about all of these things right now. So let's talk about the number one thing that we see. Multi-factor authentication is not enabled by default. I think it's quite crazy that Microsoft allows this to take place. When looking at your iPhone or other devices, when you turn it on, it's going to warn you right away. Please turn on multi-factor authentication. There's going to be a token there that says, please do this. They're going to bug you. They're going to send pop-ups. You log into, most websites that offer MFA. Your bank doesn't even allow you to log in without multi-factor authentication, most of them. It's going to encourage you. It's going to be annoying, and it's going to say, please enable it. That's not how it is in Office 365 right now. In Active Directory, it's underneath a secure score, and it says, hey, you'll get 50 points if you enable this, right? So if you require MFA for your administrative roles, we'll give you 50 bonus points. But it's not screaming at you every day. And that is one of the things, and Andrew is going to touch on later in the presentation, some of the top 5 things you can do right away to protect your environment. By far, we agree that enabling MFA for administrative roles is absolutely essential. And we'll talk about that. But it's kind of crazy that it is not enabled or enforced. And now you can set it this way, but that is one of the first things that we encourage our clients to do, is make sure that you do this. And we're going to talk about that. That is it's just so important. Here's the next topic. Active Directory. Audit logging is not enabled. Now, I know Microsoft is working on this. They've sent some updates, and they say, hey, we're going to turn some of these things on. What we're looking at here in the screenshot, and I'm going to zoom in on this. This is a recently created, this was created less than, I believe, 48 hours ago. This environment was created just to see, we wanted to confirm that the audit logging functionality worked the same way. And indeed it does. I'm going to read to you what it says in the yellow here. To use this feature, turn on auditing so we can start to record user and admin activity in your organization. When you turn this on, activity will be recorded to the Office 365 audit log and available for you to view in a report. So let's go through a common situation that we run into. Customer calls up, they say, hey, we just had a business email compromise. We've just had an attack on our environment. We've had some other incident that just took place. Let's go ahead and take a look at the logs, and they get greeted with this wonderful message that says, hey, we're not recording anything. And that's a huge problem. What does it take to turn it on? You move your mouse over there and you click turn on, and you wait, 24 hours and it turns on. Why it's not on by default, I don't know. But it's absolutely essential that that be turned on. It's something you can do quickly. I'm going to put the URL up here and let it sit for a little bit so you can take a look at it. The way to do it right now is go to protection.office.com unified audit log. Absolutely go in there, make sure it's turned on. If you do not see the yellow bar, the audit logging is enabled. But I'm just going to let that sit. You absolutely need to do that. So many times we log into the environment, and for whatever reason, whether that organization never had a go here, or they were just getting started and they just didn't get to it, they just finished their migration, something like that, and the audit logging is not on. It's absolutely essential. So just please do that right away. Okay. Next area is called conditional access. And this is absolutely another area that is quite challenging. We know it's growing. Microsoft is making developments in this all the time. There's challenges that we see. We do have problems. There's connecting in here programmatically for our audit purposes, and a lot of it is done through the GUI. But conditional access policies are basically, you think about it like application firewall policies. These are rules that are set up. Now, Microsoft started off with these 4 preview policies. According to the note above, these were supposed to be deprecated as of February 29th. However, they're still there. We actually just checked. These are still there. A lot of organizations are relying on it. These policies do some of the things that we talked about. They can require MFA for admins. They can block legacy authentication. But these baseline policies are going away. So if you're relying on them, they will be removed. So you got to go in here and set these up. But none of them are enabled out of the box, which is quite amazing. This is where you do go through and you do disable basic authentication. Basic authentication, I think Andrew might touch on that down the road, or if you want, Andrew, do you want to jump in on that one real quick on basic authentication?
Absolutely. So Microsoft, what they're doing is they're going to be removing, coming later this year, many of the legacy authentication protocols. They're going to be moving to more modern authentication. So this will help reduce the attack surface and enable you to use modern authentication and MFA, which is really helps in eliminating attack compromise.
Great. So this is where you would do that. And here's the crazy thing. Microsoft says, hey, we recommend enabling the security defaults going forward. Well, here's a problem. They're not enabled by default. So it's quite an area that needs a lot of work. Microsoft is well aware of it. And what is encouraging to see, though, by the way, I do need to put a shout out to the team that's working on this. It is changing rapidly, which is challenging for us when we go and do audits. But we also see that they are aware of it and they are making progress, which is always a really good thing to see that progress is being made. I do want to just quickly touch on those security defaults. Please enable them with extreme caution. We have some organizations that have just thrown that on, and it really caused some challenges for them. There's some settings that it puts on. For example, for multi-factor authentication, it may enable it so that it only works with the app, and people don't have the app. They only have, let's say, the text messages, and so that makes it quite challenging. So please be aware there is something called security defaults. It is available, but again, that needs to be reviewed. And we do suggest in that space that you have a conversation or you have it tested in a dev environment. And we're going to actually, one of the giveaways, if you stick with us near the end, we're going to show you how you can actually set up your own dev environment for yourself for Office 365 and test these settings out. So many times we talk to organizations and we say, hey, well, let's jump into your Office 365 dev environment. And they're like, we don't have one. So we'll tell you how to get that set. So if you stick with us, we're gonna tell you a little bit about that. I think we're gonna take a few quick questions here. So then we'll get back to some of the content.
Yeah, so first one is, how many business email compromise cases have you seen where the adversary also defeated MFA?
Yeah, so usually I don't think we've had any directly this year. We have had other cases where we've defeated the MFA by push notifications. So we've worked with our clients where we've actually had triggered the MFA to take place with compromised credentials, and then they've gone ahead and the person we were testing against doing the pen tested, they went ahead and they clicked approve when they shouldn't have. I don't think we have had that that I can think of with business email compromise with Office 365.
Great. How about not using Office 365 MFA, but use IDP SAML with MFA?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, here's the neat thing about it. You can use third-party MFA solutions. I have one client that for a lot of different reasons, they needed to use RSA. That worked quite well for them. And another client used Duo. And yes, both of those are available. There's lots of different ways to do it. Again, multi-factor authentication actually expands beyond, if we actually look at that definition, to more than just the device. I mean, there's certain things that go into that multi-factors, right? So Stephen, so we could have what IP address they're coming from. Is their machine in our domain? You know, are there other factors, right? Multiple factors that we can build on. What we really want to avoid is single factor, which is just username and password. If we can eliminate that and make it just a little bit harder, you know, those threat actors will move on, right? A lot of these, some of these are direct threats. They're just specifically targeting your organization. And in those situations, you know, it's going to be it's difficult to defend against. But what we really want to, another thing we want to avoid is you can imagine a line of cars and a threat actor or a criminal walking down the street and just checking those doors. If they're checking those doors and you have basic authentication still enabled and you still don't have multi-factor authentication enabled, they're going to go steal the stuff from your car. The same thing is going to happen with Office 365.
Okay, great. We had a comment that in case unified audit logs are disabled, you can also check audit logs in Azure. It is enabled by default for 7 days.
Yeah.
With P1, P2, we'll go up to 30 days.
Yep.
Anything on that?
Yeah, so it is enabled in other areas. You do want to check it though. And there's mention of P1 and P2. So a lot of our clients may have up to 600 users on the Office 365 lower level licenses, right? So you can have 300 business and then business premium. You can have 300 of each of those. So you might have 600 users, which is a nice size organization, and still not have access to some of the enterprise features. So one of the things to note is make sure you work with your partner or whoever you're purchasing your Office 365 licenses from to ensure that you actually have the right licensing to enable the features and functionality. Just adding some of those licenses could dramatically change what is available to you. When Andrew talks about the top 5, one of the things that he's going to talk about does require licenses, and I'm sure he'll note it then.
And last one, and then I'll let you move on. Is MFA supported in any capacity with Basic Auth?
I don't believe so. I think you have to have modern authentication enabled. I believe you do have to have modern authentication, but yeah, basic authentication is going away. Actually, it's EOL. I think we're going to talk about this here. Andrew will talk about that when basic authentication will be end of life. It will no longer even be available for you. So you definitely want to get away from that. Great. So I'm going to switch over to something that has been a challenge for a long time. How many times does your help desk go through and they set the password to summer 2018? And then the person who gets it says, oh, that's easy to remember, and I wouldn't have thought of that, so I'm going to use that for the rest of my life. Or they said, we're Contoso, so the password's going to be Contoso123. And they go ahead and they put it in there, and then the person never changes it. So Active Directory has a password policy. They have the capability to block all of these passwords. You can enable custom blacklists. Here's the problem. So you can even add all these things. So you can add in there, and it's a really great system. You can put in there the name of your company and password and other keywords. Microsoft provides a list of all of these top 1,000 passwords that are used or whatever. But look at this. Here's the setting. It's set to audit. So it's not enforced. If enforced, users will be prevented from setting banned passwords and the attempt will be logged. If set to audit, it'll only be logged. I think it should make a lot of sense to flick that over, and it really wouldn't hurt you. So we highly recommend you switch this one over to enforced and add in those banned passwords. A lot of times people say, well, how did they get in? We actually, the business case we used for some of our examples earlier in the deck, the password was brute forced, because they were able to do that in a relatively short period of time because they didn't have things like this in place. It's quite scary that what's scary that this feature is not enabled by default. I know a lot of other websites don't let you use simple passwords, and this really would help that. So another great tip, please enforce this. That'll really help you out. Now we're going to jump into Exchange. So the first ones that we talked about were around authentication. Now we're going to jump into some simple things that you can look at in Exchange to really help protect you. Look at this one, common attachment file types. And I got this is what we see all the time. The common attachment filter is set to off. Oh my gosh. So that means it's allowing every type of attachment in, no matter what. So we can send in our payloads. This is going to make our, I think some of the guys are on the line. I'm sure there's lots of folks in this line. It's going to make it harder for our pen testing if we start turning these features on, but that's okay. We'll figure out a ways around it. But look at this. They're not filtering these files. And if we scroll down that list, EXEs are in there and all these other great files. But here's what's even crazier. So you're going to do what's recommended because you're proactive. You're going to go over there and you're going to click that on button. Well, guess what? If you scroll down that list of what's enabled, Excel and Word macro enabled documents, even though it's got DOCM, DOCXM is not there. XLXSM is still not in there. You manually need to hit that plus button and filter out a bunch of those other ones. So another super important thing to do, and just think, when we're trying to attack an organization, if the attachments were blocked, that would cause a huge positive impact on the organization. Now, you may have to deal with those phone calls, and you may have to deal with the person from marketing or sales or procurement come over to you and say, we need to be able to get that .whatever file through. I'd rather deal with that than having to deal with a compromised environment, with business email compromised, with millions of hard dollars lost, with your information and intellectual property out in the open. I'd rather deal with John over there, down the road, or Sally or Jim dealing with, hey, how do I get that file type through? And there's much better ways of doing it, by the way, including SharePoint, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But definitely review your common attachment filters. Make sure that you're really blocking the bad stuff. Spam filtering, another great area. And again, we're covering a lot of the things that are in the basic implementations of Office 365. We're not going to dive in this webinar into advanced threat protection. We'll probably be scheduling another one to really go into depth in ATP. There's a lot of amazing things happening there. But in most environments, they have just the basics. And so we're going into that. But take a look at these settings. If you can see it on your screen, I'm going to list some of the ones that are interesting. Numeric IP address in the URL. So when people are sending in an email, and in that email it says, hey, please click here to win the free iPad. They might be lazy and they're just going to put an IP address in there. They're not actually going to go there because that's what, I'm just going to, spam this company and see if they click on that link. Switching that over would automatically increase the spam score. And marking things as spam. What about if there's a bunch of JavaScript in the email, or maybe just dealing with the NDR backscatter, or hey, let's apply a sensitive word list, words that should just never be in a business email. Let's turn those on. Those are all set to default. So another thing you can do is review each of these settings, and we can help you do that to help develop a better spam filter. Now, Microsoft does have some advanced threat protection and some more advanced tools, but even for the basics, some of these things should be set. These should be included. These are just the basics where it's like, yeah, it's pretty much gonna be a bogus message. So highly encourage you to take a look at those spam settings. Here's one that would save a lot of grief. When we talk about business email compromise or other attacks that come in, one of the things the threat actors do is they go ahead and they set up on that account to automatically forward anything that is, let's say, the word wire transfer in the subject line or whatever they're planning to do, to automatically forward that email to their Proton Mail or their Gmail account so that they can go ahead and look at the correspondence. It's something super easy to do. It's enabled by default across the board. We strongly suggest in reviewing this, taking a look at how many people have these forwarding rules set up, reviewing why they have those forwarding rules set up, and use another mechanism to do that. There's so many other different ways to do that, and we can help you figure out those ways of those business cases. But in general, unchecking that checkbox, allow automatic forwarding, that can have a huge positive impact on your organization. How many people use Teams? I know a lot of people do. It's a great way to collaborate, right? It's a great way to share files. It's a really cool tool. We used it a lot. But how many people, you go through this business case and you say, hey, I'm gonna implement Office 365. We're gonna get rid of Dropbox and Box and Google Drive, and we're gonna use OneDrive because it has better encryption. It has all sorts of great features that we're interested in. And so we're gonna go ahead and eliminate using these other providers, because we can't really control them, right? Dropbox maybe as a consumer service box. But take a look at when you turn Teams on, turn on or turn off file sharing and cloud file storing options in the Files tab. So right off the bat, we're encouraging our users to use Dropbox, Box, and Google Drive. All the things that we put in our business case to move to Office 365 that we were going to eliminate, we're now re-encouraging back in Teams. So yeah, you definitely want to review that and make sure that's a good point there. I think we're probably at a good point if there's some additional questions we have.
A lot of questions.
Great. So let's jump into some questions before we get into SharePoint.
Do all users need a P1 license?
That is a good question. So we have the P1 and we have the P2 licenses. It does come to a case-by-case situation and what your requirements are. That would be an area that, again, you could work with us on that and we could understand your situation. All is a big term, and I would say not all need that, but it is encouraged to take a look at that. We can go into what bundles you have. So example, if you have an E5, then you already have a lot of those features enabled. It is a little bit complicated. I hope Microsoft is working to simplify that, but I would say that it's a case-by-case basis, depending upon your organization and what your needs are. And again, what licensing you have today.
And then just one comment, a few people have mentioned that MFA can be bypassed, but we're simply saying from the incident response that we've seen or heard of, that wasn't the reason.
Yeah, so MFA always, not always, but MFA can be bypassed, right? So and what do we mean by that? So we can do SIM hijacking, right? So we can take someone's cell phone and route that so that we get the same MFA code. There's recent attacks where they're putting up a man in the middle attack and looking at the proxy and things like that. Yes, all of those things are theoretically possible. Are they on a wide scale? Probably not as wide scale as we would think. I know in Europe, for example, they are moving away from using text-based text messages, SMS messages for MFA, and I think the regulations are switching so that you have to use an app, which is more secure. Again, with anything, it can be misconfigured and it can be misused. We can have it where it sends out the push notification and people blindly press the approve all the time, right? So yes, that's a huge problem if it's set up that way. You need to review your organization, the culture of your organization, make sure you train individuals on how to use the MFA program. So all of those things are essential when you're thinking about MFA. Just because there's always an exception to it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? So yes, someone can pick a lock. Okay, so therefore, should I leave my door unlocked? No, I should still lock my door. Yes, someone may pick it, but it's still good advice to go ahead and lock it. So all we're saying is lock your doors at night, right? So MFA gives you that next level. Will it improve? Absolutely. We think that, um, uh, all the organizations, whether it's Facebook or Google or Microsoft, they're all working on this whole idea of how do we manage identities. And, we're hearing that passwords are dead and all of these things. That's coming. We kind of deal in reality right now. So right now, one of the best solutions you can use is MFA. So it is true that there are potentially ways to bypass anything. Hence the whole field that we're in security. But that is not a good excuse not to deploy it.
If you enable MFA for all global admins, what do you do in a break glass case?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So there are a couple. So let's think about this, right? So you're connecting into Office 365, which is a cloud service, right? And so having a more than one is useful. So don't just have one global admin. You should have multiple global admins. You can potentially go ahead and store those offline credentials. So Microsoft does allow you to have those print out those codes, and you can use those codes for that. So those are all ways you can do it. And then you can set up some exceptions. So if you have a known location that you're going to connect from, an IP address, and say, okay, we're going to set up a conditional access policy that if you're coming from this specific IP address and you're doing this specific task and you're this specific user, and we have a really complex password or a more complex password, since there are some limits that Office 365 does, at least 15 characters or more, then we're going to allow it on our secure score. So in those situations, that does help. So there are always some exceptions, but in general, I would say that all admins should have it, especially if you have multiple admin situation, so that you have that available. And maybe one of the people on your list is, an executive that's not in IT, that maybe is your break glass, right? So that, is in a different department. All sorts of different ideas we could get in there. Good.
Okay, great.
Okay. Thanks. Great questions. Great participation. There's quite a few people. I don't want to say the exact number, but it's probably more than we normally see every day. I want to get into SharePoint. Now, this one is absolutely mind blowing, right? So this is a default configuration. We didn't mock this up. You can check it now, and I'll show you how you can check it in your own environment. We go into the admin center for OneDrive and SharePoint and look at these defaults. Default, share with anyone. Encourage your users to share the link with anyone. That's a great idea. So we just got the payroll data. We have everyone's sensitive information. And when they go to share it, the default is share with anyone with the link. It gets even better. The default is share with anyone, no sign-in required. Look at that. I'm zooming in on it right here. So SharePoint and OneDrive are set up with that slider. There's a little slider that moves up and down there, so that any user, not just some users, but any user can create shareable links that do not require sign-in. So think about that. Now, let's think about OneDrive for Business. I want to just pause for a second. What do we use OneDrive for Business for? We use that for all sorts of things. Microsoft is encouraging us to use OneDrive for Business as our ransomware protection. So Windows 10, if you have Windows 10, a little bit of group policy, a little bit of, single sign-on, and guess what? I can deploy OneDrive for Business across, tens of thousands of my Windows 10 clients. And guess what? They're going to sync all sorts of things. Their desktop, their My Documents, their photos, their pictures. It's all going to sync to OneDrive. Perfect. Now, if I get ransomware, I'm going to at least have a cloud version of it, and I'm going to have versioning and all those great features. But they could accidentally share a link to their entire desktop and to their entire documents directory to the rest of the world, and no sign-in is required. Kind of crazy. So definitely review your SharePoint Online and your OneDrive settings. External file sharing by default out of the box, most permissive. Not what I would do. I don't know about you, but that sounds a little bit scary. So that's one of the things that we find that there's ways to audit this. You can't, you could break things. You could break all sorts of things. And there is a play between SharePoint and OneDrive. As you slide one, it does slide the other. We can get into those details about how that works, but it's quite crazy. We recommend at a minimum, moving to the next level down, which new users and existing external users are allowed, but they at least have to authenticate who they are. There's much more settings, I'll go behind there, that you can have there, especially in this advanced settings for shareable links. We recommend those highly be reviewed. Okay, so we're now going to jump over into some of the tools that Microsoft gives us to kind of look at what's going on in our environment. I want to open it up if there's any additional questions at this point that we have. I know there's quite a few coming in, so we're going to take a second here and see if there's some questions that.
Have you dealt with the new Azure Active Directory baseline policies and defaults since the 229 change, so 4 days ago?
So yes, we have looked at those default security settings. Those are a bit challenging. So there's some good documentation online from Microsoft about that. So actually right on that blue bar, I'm going to switch back to that screen. 1 second here. Right here. So on that blue bar, when you click that little arrow to the far right, it will take you to a full page on that. And they will go through and explain exactly what that matrix looks like. You definitely do not want to just enable that. We have dealt with it. This has been out for probably about 2 months now, and we've had clients where we've had to go back and manually create policies to redo their security settings because they flipped that over. All sorts of strange things started to happen when they did that. So yeah, we definitely have worked with it. We would recommend probably at this point, if your licensing allows for it, that at this point you work with what they're recommending in the defaults and manually create those so you have a little bit more control over it.
And then one kind of group of questions is about the password policies and the banned password list. So for the banned password list in AD, is it important to note, it's important to note that an agent needs to be installed on any on-premise DCs for the functionality to be supported. Yes. Does the ADPP allow for different settings, say by OU, AD group, etc.? And then there was one other one. Aren't banned passwords just scored differently? They aren't actually prohibited.
They are prohibited. So there is, let me see if I can find that deck here so we can talk to it. 1 second, please. Right here. So yeah, that's a great point of clarification. You do need to install an agent in your Active Directory environment to make this happen. So that's actually how Microsoft, a lot of the third parties also do it that way. So we do work with third parties. I'm not going to promote them because we don't sell software, but there are third party organizations that basically sell software, and there's open source projects that also do the same thing, that are filtering those passwords on the Active Directory box, and they're kind of connecting back and forth and making sure that banned passwords aren't used or known breach passwords aren't used. That is part of the tool. So yes, it is in there. It is, if you need more complicated settings, then I would suggest looking at a third-party tool. In general, this is a all or nothing right here, these custom banned passwords at this point. But it is a great place to start. You do need that. You do need to install the agent on your Active Directory environment so that it fully synchronized. Some organizations have chosen to use where they're cloud first, and so they're moving a lot of their. They don't have the legacy Active Directory. They may have chosen to put, let's say, a couple thousand users for their field service on Office 365 in a different tenant, where they don't give them domain credentials. And in that situation, there's no agent that needs to be installed because it's not synchronized back to a domain controller. But yes, thank you for noting that. Whoever did that, shout out. Thanks for mentioning that. I forgot to mention that you do need to install an agent in there. That's also why you want to put, so one of the controversies, and it is a controversy around this password list, is that you do need to, for Microsoft to really do this, you need to sync your password hashes. And I'm not going to go into that controversy, but so for this to work with AD Connect and synchronizing it back and forth, you need to go ahead and send your hashes to the cloud for analysis. And so that is a concern. So again, all of these things are recommendations. They're just kind of things to look at. And, you know, some of these do have some nuances that we need to talk about, but we do not have time today to go into all of those nuances because I still got a bunch of deck slides left, and everyone's expecting how do they create their own awesomely cool dev environment so they can hack it themselves. I know that. Okay, let me jump up on the deck here. I'm going to talk about the Security Center. So Microsoft is relaunching the Security Center. They used to go to one website and they kind of put together the Security Center and the Compliance Center, and they're launching the new Security Center. It still has the Secure Score, an improved version of the Secure Score, if you're familiar with that, with improvement actions right there. They're starting to launch the quick fixes, which are really cool. So when they say, hey, do this, and then you're like, oh man, how do I do that? I'm gonna have to call Trusted Sec and their remediation team, which we don't mind. But on some of those, you can just click a button. They have those now. The quick fixes are coming, which is just great because, you know, we're really about improving the security posture of your organization. And that's why we're doing these webinars. That's why we come out and help you. And when you do get stuck, just reach out to us. If there's something that's available that will really improve your security, that's fine. Do it right away. And we're really excited that Microsoft is doing that. They now have incorporated all of the alerts in there, which is great. And they have, if your licensing permits, they do have the attack simulator. So you can actually simulate attacks to test your defenses. These are just the basics, right? They're pretty cool. But one of them, for example, that we talked about earlier was the password spray attack. So this is where a password spray attack is against your organization, done by running a list of commonly used passwords against a list of valid Office 365 user accounts. They craft one password to try against all of the known user accounts. If it's not successful, we'll try another one. So again, having those banned passwords would solve this problem. And then guess what? Having MFA would also solve this problem. But they let you actually simulate this attack against the Office 365 environment so you can really be proactive about that. And that's done through the Security Center. The Security Center, we will have the link directly to it, but it's just security.microsoft.com. We will have that link at the end of this under a deck called Important Links, I believe, or something to that effect. So really kind of cool. There's a bunch of other attacks that take place in there, such as some phishing attempts, some fierce phishing, and it's really kind of neat that they're including that as part of your some of your licenses. I'm going to jump into the Compliance Center. Now, compliance is a little different, and we segregate that from the Security Center and the compliance. They're really two different worlds, right? So when we're talking about the Security Center, we're talking about configurations, getting things set up right, kind of the infrastructure, making sure things are as, you know, locked down as they could be. When we get into compliance, we're really talking about the business side of things. We're going to build on those technical tools. We're going to add those in there, but we're also going to deal with all of the policies and the procedures and data loss prevention. We're going to deal with data classification. Maybe we have GDPR issues to deal with. Maybe we need to deal with e-discovery. All of those types of things are going to be found inside the Compliance Center. And the URL for that's nice and easy. It's just compliance.microsoft.com. It's also going to deal with all of your information and records management. And it's going to give you kind of a really cool score. You'll see that there's a lot more points here. This is just a turn it on by default demo account, and we're at 73%, but we still have 799 things to go through. So significantly more. You'll see this is just a demo, but there's all sorts of things here. So we're going to be taking a look at reviewing policies and procedures, and we're going to be moving towards specific standards. So you're going to select a standard. Maybe it's NIST 800-171, maybe 853, maybe FedRAMP. Maybe you're working on a FedRAMP moderate or something like that. You're going to work in one of those environments, and you're going to start, Microsoft gives you a way to review all of the items associated with it. And what's also nice is it allows you to upload the documentation so that you can actually show that you're moving in the right direction. So the Compliance Center is really cool. Okay, up next, we're going to have Andrew walk us through some of the top 5 things you can do right now to take some action. So Andrew, I am going to hand it over to you. So whenever you're ready, take it away.
Excellent. So we have our top 5 actions to take. We can enforce MFA for all admins, and we want to complete that today. This is a huge one. All of our admins have privileged access and can definitely have full reign over the environment. So this is one we definitely want to take as soon as possible and really want to complete this today.
Yeah, they need to do this today, right? There should only be a handful of them. Buy them some extra pizza, talk to everyone, say, guys, we got to do this, guys and gals, we got to get this done, right? There should be no excuse for this, right? Cool. Number 2, Andrew, I'm going to pop it up here for you.
Enforcing MFA for all users. Begin the process today. So as we've talked about, just relying on passwords is not simply good enough, as it can lead to compromise. Turning on that MFA goes that extra step, making it an extra hoop for attackers to jump through. So looking at your environment and beginning to enable MFA for all users is one we highly, highly recommend. And that's why we have it as number 2.
Absolutely. And there's some challenges with that, right? So it's not, we have to start it today, but there are going to be some challenges. You have to communicate, you got to do a lot of things, but the risk on the other side, right, Andrew, we've seen is dramatic if they don't do it. Let's turn on number 3 here.
Turn on sign-in and user risk policies. Complete today. This one, your license will vary, or a license is required for this. So what we can do is we can flag users and sign-ins for risk. So if we have a privileged admin, and if that user signs in at any point in time, we can get an alert and begin our detection and begin our response accordingly. Or if we do a sign-in, so if we sign in from one trusted location at a point in time, and then we immediately sign in from a different location, we can definitely get a detection on that and begin our incident response accordingly.
Absolutely. That's a critical one. And it's amazing to look through those logs and say, hey, you're in Cleveland today, and 2 seconds later you're in Russia. It's probably not happening. So it does all sorts of great things. And Microsoft is definitely making some areas there to automatically block that down. We're going to show you number 4 now.
Disabling the basic authentication, start today. This one will be EUL October of 2020, so just keep that in mind. But a lot of these authentication mechanisms use weaker or clear text protocols or have been deprecated. So what we want to do is we want to disable these and really reduce our attack surface, really making it smaller, making it harder for that perimeter to be cracked.
Absolutely. Number 5.
Enable the audit logging. Please, please complete this today. Helping and in turning on the audit logging ensures proper and adequate incident response. This can go really a long way in really detecting an adversary and or triaging an incident as well.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you. Those were great. We're going to jump into some important sites with the URL in the next slide here. And I know we're coming up around the 1 hour mark. So I know some of you are going to have to fall off at that point, but we're going to have a few more slides. So just please bear with us. We're going to get through some of these important slides. So the Security Center, the new one, is available at security.microsoft.com. Highly encourage you to go there today. Take a look. If you're not an admin, you do need to be if you don't have that, maybe you're in the security department or another department and you're not global admin, you will need to request that you are security reader to get access to. There's other permissions that are also required for that. The second item we have here is the Office Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. You do need permissions for that too, but if you're a global admin, you do have access. You can talk to your global admins to request access for the Compliance Center. Again, global admins also, but just a side note there, when you get into the e-discovery, global admins do not have permissions. They do need to be granted permissions to do specific e-discovery cases and look at certain data. And finally, the most exciting one, I'm going to let Andrew talk to this one. This is really cool. Microsoft has launched the My Sign-ins. So Andrew, if you want to jump in real quick and talk a little bit about how exciting this is, that would be great.
Yep. This is recently new. I believe October 2019, they just started rolling this out. It's amazing. Any user can go in and see if anyone is trying to guess their password, or if an attacker successfully signed in from an account from a different location. You'll have your IP address, your browser, geolocation, as well as what apps an adversary may be utilizing or trying to access.
Yeah, we looked at that. That was quite amazing. It talks about how they get in, right? What method, what they're using, location, and it's really user friendly and actually quite interesting. So really cool. Definitely go to mysignins.microsoft.com and take a look at what's going on there. Excellent. Well, thank you for sticking around. One of the last things we wanted to do is, great, Paul, you've showed us all this amazingly cool stuff, and we don't have the license for that. And we can't do that. And so how do I help try this? I don't want to go against my production environment and flick that switch. And then all of a sudden, I got all these problems. So, how do you do that? And so we're going to give you on the next slide, this is worth the wait, how you actually go ahead and log in. So go to developer.microsoft.com, and then you can fill in your language there, Office, and join their dev program. You get a 90-day 25 user subscription for your an Office 365 environment. And this is, you have to log in, you have to authenticate, you have to say who you are. You'll get a 25 user license. You will then go ahead and click on the sample data packs on the bottom. So right there, you can see that I was clicking on users. It's going to build out a bunch of users for me with real data. Then I'm going to go ahead and click on the mail and events. It's going to build in there a bunch of email and audit log events for me to take a look at. And then finally, I'm going to click that SharePoint, and I'm going to build out a couple SharePoint sites. I'm going to make a team site and a corporate site. So I'm going to build out through this program a fully available environment for me to take a look at. And it's absolutely critical for when you're setting these settings up and doing experiments that you don't do it in your production environment. Some of these things, like enabling MFA for your global admins, it takes a few minutes. Try it here. Make sure you know exactly what's going to take place. Document those changes. If you need to go through a change management board, which most of us do, this is a great way to do it and say, here's the steps I am going to take. Here is exactly what we're going to do. Here is exactly how we're going to roll it back. And you can do that in your own dev environment. So this is really for developers, but from an operations perspective, this is absolutely invaluable. And it also helps you from an internal sales perspective, because just because you're an IT or a security person does not mean you're not a salesperson. In fact, you're probably more of a salesperson than you know, because you're going to have to convince the organization that making these changes is essential to the longevity of their organization. And so if you have a tool like this where you can go in there and take a look at what's going on, try these settings, explore the environment, take some great screenshots and say, look, we were able to see exactly how that attack path took place. It's going to be great. So please, highly encourage you to do that. And that alone is a pretty cool thing to do. The next thing is, how does Trusted Sec help? So we do have to let you know where we can come in and help you, because a lot of times it doesn't matter the size of the organization, small, large, or massive. Everyone needs help, right? So we can help you with all sorts of things. Definitely, we can help you with this configuration review. We can go through what we call a top 10. It's actually more than 10 best practices, and we can help you get some of those quick wins. You're in a situation where, like, hey, we have to go through a change board and we have to get these configurations done and we need some help. Well, we can definitely help you with that. We do that all the time. We have a team that's standing by, ready to help you get those configuration change. Once you've gone through that and you have at least configured your environment, then we get into controls audits, and we can align your environment with stuff like the NIST CSF or 800-171, or even the FedRAMP moderate. We can help you design and develop these controls. We can help you implement those policies and procedures inside your organization. That's where we can bring in a combination of our resources. And finally, we do have remediation services available. So this is where we can actually help you. We can do all sorts of things. We can get on with your engineers and your sysadmins and help you design and develop architectures and deal with those questions like, well, we have 57 facilities and they're on this type of network, and how do we deal with this type of VPN, and does it work with with all sorts of things. We get into all those conversations, or, hey, we're mandated to use RSA two-factor authentication. We can help you with that. And so we can help you do that. We can help you even do policy and procedure development, and help you with our remediation services. So I think we're gonna see if there's a few more questions, if any, and kind of open it up. And then I'm just gonna do a little bit of promo here before we get back into the questions. We do have Justin's going to be doing an Ask Me Anything. He's our PCI practice lead, great guy. On March 11th at 1 p.m., he's going to be dealing with PCI, and you really, this is a great opportunity to get some real information. If you're dealing with PCI in your environment, it's just it's going to be a great resource. So highly encourage you to join that. But we're going to go back to this here. Any Q&A right now?
Yeah, so that concludes our formal presentation for anyone that needs to jump off, but we will continue answering questions here. We have quite a bit of them, and maybe I'll go to Andrew first. Andrew, you see some of the questions on there. Could you go into some of the licensing things, what level of license is required for a sign-in user, for example, and E1, E5, all that kind of thing, the cost. Can you touch on some of those issues that people are facing?
Absolutely. So I'm seeing a couple questions on the sign-in and user risk, flagging those for risk. We also have a couple questions on the attack simulator licensing. First, starting on our sign-in and flagging users for risk. To my knowledge, that requires an E5 license or an Azure P2 license. P2 would give you the PIM and PAM, and as well, however, that could also be baked into the E5 licensing. So there are various a la carte options, but to our knowledge, it would be either an Azure P2 license or the E5 license. Regarding the attack simulator licensing, so for this one, you actually need an Office 365 ATP, or Advanced Threat Protection Plan 2 license. That can be purchased a la carte, or you can go with the Office 365 E5 license. The Office 365 E5 license will include the ATP Plan 2. So you have a variety of options there, whether you're going to go a la carte or go the full E5 licensing.
I'm going to jump on the one around automatic forwarding, if I could. There was a question around a lot of questions actually around the automatic forwarding. The automatic forwarding, it will disable. In the tests that we've done in environments, it does disable that right away. You want to take a look. There's some great scripts out there. There's PowerShell scripts that you can log in and look at your environment. If you just do a quick Google, it's a Microsoft thing, so you say Bing, but no, Google it and go ahead and Google, look for some PowerShell scripts to audit your environment for the forwarding. I would recommend that you do not flick that flag over until you've reviewed all of those forwarding rules that are currently set. It is quite eye-opening. Have conversations with those individuals, figure out why they're doing it, and then make the change. So just go through proper change control that you would normally do. Surprisingly, I've been in some very large organizations and they have not had any forwarding that was purposely put there. There was some erroneous ones, but it was relatively easy to do that. Taking a look at some of these other questions here. There's quite a few flowing in, so we're getting, give me a second here. I think there's a question here around auditing and taking a look at with data loss prevention, things like that. One of the techniques that's used on the desktop is, so if we enable, so for example, let me just dive into this one a little bit. I see it here. It's the, got it. Yep. So data loss prevention is a really cool tool from Microsoft. So, hey, are they storing credit cards? Are they storing PII in the cloud? Well, that looks at your OneDrive and your SharePoint environments. Well, if we're going to go ahead and enable OneDrive Sync, because you've properly set up your environment, it's secure, people aren't going to be sharing stuff they shouldn't be sharing. Those files are now in the cloud, and so the data loss prevention policies can now be analyzed against that. So you can see if individuals are storing stuff in their My Documents directory that they shouldn't be. So that's one technique that can be used to take a look at that. And you can also add what do you call it, additional folders in there. There's another question that is around the difference between the Compliance Center and the Security and Compliance Center. So what they're doing is they're, breaking those out into two distinct areas. So they're kind of, Andrew and I were talking about this. They were separate, now they're back together, now they're separate again. So they've really defined, it looks like from everything we read, and as a partner, we get the newsletters and stuff, looks like they're going to have the security area and then they're going to have the compliance area. Right now you can actually go to the quote unquote legacy security and compliance center and see access to both of them, but they're really going to start breaking that out into those two. And then there are some nuances. I know there's going to be some people putting questions in here too. There are some nuances also between compliance for Office 365 and Azure. So there's going to be additional things where that's kind of outside of scope of this, but there are scores specifically around, in your Azure environment and auditing your Azure environment versus just your Office 365. But this, again, that's a massive topic. If we want to get into that, how do we actually audit the and benchmark and baseline our Azure environment, which is just probably 100, maybe 1,000 times bigger than just an Office 365. Andrew, if you see any there, I'm going to kind of keep trying to look through this. There's so many coming in here. There were some questions around ATP. Andrew, do you want to give a little sneak preview of ATP in general and your impressions of kind of what we saw? You want to jump in on that? I think we're not going to dive into it. We're not going to show screenshots of it, but maybe talk a little bit about some of the amazing things that are being developed in ATP that you see right now. Can you jump on that?
Absolutely. So like all things, it started off slow, but quickly Microsoft is really, really increasing in this space. And ATP is really, really getting better, both for trying to integrate all of the devices from Windows Defender ATP on the endpoint to Office 365 ATP to even Azure Active Directory ATP as well, and really rolling it into one pane of glass. So what you can do is you can go into the dev environment that Paul said. There's also, I believe, a Windows Defender ATP separate dev lab as well. But what you can do is you can see all the different types of alerts and attacks that it can do. And you even get fake data in there as well. So there's different types of attacks like credential accessing that lead to full domain compromise, such as DC Sync and DC Shadow alerts. And really it will show some user behavior, as well as you can do really IR and different investigations from going live to quarantining.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just amazing, so I think that there's probably going to be enough interest in showing that and looking at it and how that can really change the landscape. So that's probably something we'll do a future session on. There was a question here around the dev environments, because I know that's a really cool thing. I'm going to answer that one alive. So your dev environment is a 90-day renewable license. So you can have, as a developer, you can renew it. So once per quarter, and then you can go ahead and have about 25 seats in there. So this is definitely something you're not going to be able to use to skirt around any type of licensing or anything like that. It's going to have, Contoso Corporation or whatever throughout it, and a bunch of logos and things like that. So if you're a partner, there's changes. So as a partner, Microsoft partners have the ability to do slightly different environments. I'm not going to go into the details there, but basically it's the same thing, but just on a larger scale with a few different things. But in the dev environment, yeah, you can definitely do that. You can do that for 90 days. It is renewable, and you get 25 seats of those licenses.
Maybe one or two more. I know there's
Yep.
Still quite a few. Anything that you would like to get to?
So there's one around MFA. So they won't be able to handle MFA. So that would be one where you would talk to our remediation team about that. We have worked with clients that have had challenges, right? So maybe they are only able to, maybe they're visually impaired, or maybe they have trouble hearing. And so we've found ways to work with them to enable MFA. So we've had organizations where, they don't have cell phones, things like that. They maybe only have an office phone, or they don't get reception where they are. There's lots of different things we can do to roll that out. So we'd have to know the exact use case scenario of where it is. If there is an extreme situation where none of those things could possibly ever work, then we would go into what we do when we can't mitigate a risk with technology or put a walls around it. We would work on segmentation, and we would put additional alerting in that environment. But I would like to see the use cases. We can have a follow-up conversation on that. But I think, yeah, that's where we are. There's one on impersonation. A lot of that spoofing and stuff is actually handled in ATP in the advanced threat protection area. So I did want to answer that one real quick too.
Okay, anything else, Andrew, Paul, that you want to get to? Or I know we're really way past, and I know everyone's busy and you guys have a few things to do. Anything else that you want to tackle, or are we good to close down? For those who have the rest of the questions, we'll definitely have them, and feel free to send them along to us as well, and we will definitely try to answer them. So anything else?
Okay, no, I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Thank you, guys. It was a very, very informative webinar. Really appreciate your time. Appreciate everyone for joining. Really had a great turnout, great crowd, and great questions. So thank you very much, and look forward to the next webinar. Stay tuned to our website, and you'll definitely be getting email as well. Thanks so much.